Hello and welcome to another 9-minute Bible study. Our starting point, Acts chapter 2, and let's start with verse 24. Whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. Peter, in his message on the day of Pentecost, is driving home the point that God raised Jesus from the dead. Keep in mind that the people who heard this message, they knew about the events of the cross. They didn't need to be told that. They witnessed it. What they needed to know on this day was that God raised Jesus from the dead and the importance of God raising Jesus from the dead, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. It was not possible to hold Jesus in the grave. Impossible. God was never going to allow that, and he did not allow that. Now, at the beginning of the last lesson, I mentioned that when a message is preached, especially the gospel message, it must be backed up with Scripture. In the case of Peter, he needs to back this up from the Old Testament because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had not been written yet. So Peter needed to back this up with the existing Old Testament Scripture. All messages, all doctrine, it needs to be backed up with Scripture in the Old and the New Testament. Now, in this case, Peter will quote from Psalm 16, verses 8 through 11. This is his initial proof about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. Let's start with verse 25. For David speaketh concerning him. Who is David talking about? David is talking about Jesus the Son. So, with that in mind, I foresaw the Lord always before my face. Jesus the Son foresaw God the Father always before Jesus' face. Why? For he is on my right hand. We have established that Jesus is on the right hand of the Father. That was even the case before he came to earth, that I should not be moved. Verse 26. Therefore did my heart rejoice. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, also my flesh shall rest in hope. Now, in this verse, we're looking at a Jesus who is here on earth. In verse 25, we were looking at a Jesus who's in heaven. Now, in verse 26, what do we see? His heart, inner man, full of joy. We see his tongue expressing his joy. We also see his flesh, body, resting in hope. Why could Jesus be full of joy? Why could Jesus speak about good things? Why could Jesus' flesh rest in hope? Verse 27. Because that God the Father will not leave my, Jesus the Son's, soul in hell. Now let's piece this together a little bit. Let's go to the Gospel of Luke and let's turn to chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. And when we get there, we're going to pick up with verse 19. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. The rich man, he was filthy rich, as we'll also see, he's a dirty, rotten sinner. Verse 20. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So who is Lazarus? A very, very poor man, but as we will see in the next verse, a man who is also righteous in the sight of God. So, who is the rich man? Well, rich, sinner. Who is Lazarus? Poor, but also righteous. Verse 22. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. Now let's hold there for a second. Where did Lazarus go? Did he go to the hot side of hell? The Bible didn't say that, did it? It said he went to Abraham's bosom. Keep that in mind as we go through this. The last line in verse 22. The rich man also died and was buried, verse 23, and in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torment. Now hold there. That's the hot side of hell. So what we see is two separate areas here. One described as Abraham's bosom. Obviously, Abraham is there. We know that Abraham was righteous in the sight of God. Why? Abraham believed and God accounted it for righteousness. So we have Abraham, righteous Abraham, in the what? Abraham's bosom side of this section. Now, where is Lazarus the beggar? And by the way, this is not a parable because Jesus never uses names in parables. Jesus only uses name when it is a real life situation. So this is a real life situation. Not just the name Lazarus, but the name Abraham also. This is the only time in this account we see two real names. Now, the rich man, where is he? In hell, in torment, meaning he's on what we will call the hot side of hell. He was in what? Torment. Was Lazarus in torment? Absolutely not. Neither was Abraham. So Abraham and Lazarus, they are not on the hot side of hell whatsoever. The rich man, definitely on the hot side of hell. The last part of verse 23, and seeth Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom. So at this point, the rich man in his torment can see Abraham and Lazarus and Abraham can also see the rich man. Keep in mind, this is pre-cross, pre-resurrection of Jesus. This is not the situation now, but it was the situation before the events of the cross. So, where was the rich man? Hot side of hell. Where is Abraham and Lazarus? They are in what is called here Abraham's bosom. Now, verse 24, and he cried and said, obviously, they can talk. They are going to be heard. And we're going to pick up with this in our next lesson.